Chapter 12 Strawberries Adventure. Diggory kept his mouth tight shut. He had been growing more and more uncomfortable. He hoped that whatever happened, he wouldn't blub or do anything ridiculous. "Son of Adam," said Aslan, "are you ready to undo the wrong that you have done to my sweet country of Narnia on the very day of its birth?" "Well, I don't see what we can do," said Diggory. "You see, the queen ran away, and I asked, 'Are you ready?'" said the lion. "Yes," said Diggory. He had, for a second, some wild idea of saying, "I'll try to help you, and I'll promise to help if you'll promise to help my mother," but he realized in time that the lion was not at all that sort of person that one could try and make bargains with. But when he had said yes, he thought of his mother, and he thought of the great hopes he had had, and how they were all dying away, and a lump came down in his throat and tears in his eyes, and he blurted out, "But please, please, can't you give me something that will cure my mother?" Up till then, he'd been looking at the lion's great feet and huge claws on them. Now, in his despair, he looked up at his face. What he saw surprised him as much as anything in his whole life. For the tawny face was bent down near his own, and wonder of wonders, great shining tears stood in the lion's eyes. They were such big, bright eyes compared with Diggory's own that for a moment he felt as if the lion must really be sorrier about his mother than he was himself. my son," said Aslan. "I know. Grief is great. Only you and I in this land know that yet. Let us be good to one another. But I have to think of hundreds of years of life in Narnia. The witch whom you have brought into this world will come back to Narnia again. But it need not be yet. It is my wish to plant in Narnia a tree that she will not dare approach. And that tree will protect Narnia from her for many years. So this land shall have a long, bright morning before any clouds come over the sun. You must get me the seed from which that tree is to grow." "Yes, sir," said Diggory. He didn't know how it was to be done, but he felt sure that he was able to do it. The lion drew a deep breath, stooped his head even lower, and gave him a lion kiss. And at once Diggory felt new strength and courage had gone into him. "Dear son," said Aslan, "I will tell you what you must do. Turn and look to the west and tell me what you see." "I see terribly big mountains, Aslan," said Diggory. "I see this river coming down the cliffs in a waterfall, and beyond the cliff there are high green hills with forests, and beyond those there are higher ranges that look almost black. And then, far away, there is a big snowy mountain, many of them, all heaped up together, like pictures of the Alps, and behind those there's nothing but sky." "You see well," said the lion. "Now the land of Narnia ends where the waterfall comes down, and once you've reached the top of the cliffs, you will be out of Narnia and into the western wild. You must journey through those mountains until you find a green valley with a blue lake, walled around by mountains. At the end of the lake there is a steep green hill. On the top of that hill there is a garden, and in the center of the garden there is a tree. Pluck an apple from the tree and bring it back to me." "Yes, sir," said Diggory again. He hadn't the least idea of how he was to climb the cliff and find his way among the mountains, but he didn't like to say that for fear it would sound like making excuses. But he did say, "I hope, Aslan, you're not in a hurry. I shan't be able to get there and back very quickly." "Little son of Adam, you shall have help," said Aslan. Then he turned to the horse, who had been standing quietly beside them all this time, swishing his tail to keep the flies off, and listening with his head on one side, as if the conversation were a little difficult to understand. "My dear," said Aslan to the horse, "would you like to be a winged horse?" You should have seen how the horse shook its mane, and how its nostrils widened, and the little tap it gave to ground with one black hoof. Clearly, it would very much like to be a winged horse, but it only said, "If you wish, Aslan. If you really mean I don't know why it should be me. I'm not a very clever horse. Be winged. Be the father of all flying horses. And Aslan, roared Aslan with a voice that shook the ground, your name is Fledge. The horse shied, just as it might have shied in the old miserable days when it pulled a hansom. Then it roared. It strained its neck back as if there was a flying fly biting on its shoulder, and it wanted to scratch them. And then, just as the beast had burst out of the earth, there burst out from the shoulders of Fledge wings that spread and grew larger than eagles, larger than swans, larger than angel wings in church windows. The feathers shone chestnut color and copper color. He gave a great sweep with them and leaped into the air. 20 feet above Aslan and Diggory, he snorted, neighed, and curveted. Then, after circling once around them, he dropped to the earth, all 4 hoofs together, looking awkward and surprised, but extremely pleased. It is good, Fledge? Asked Aslan. Oh, it is very good, Aslan, said Fledge. Will you carry this little son of Adam on your back to the mountain valley I spoke of? What? Now? At once? Said Strawberry, or Fledge, as we must now call him. Hurrah! Come, little one! I've had things like you on my back before, long, long ago, where there were green fields and sugar. What are the 2 daughters of Eve whispering about? Said Aslan, turning very suddenly to Polly and the cabbie's wife, who had in fact been making friends. If you please, sir, said Queen Helen, for that is what Nellie, the cabman's wife, now was, I think the little girl would love to go too, if that weren't no trouble. What does Fledge say to that? Asked the lion. Oh, I don't mind too. Not when they're little ones, said Fledge, but I hope the elephant doesn't want to come as well. The elephant had no such wish, and the new king of Narnia helped both of the children up. That is, he gave Diggory a rough heave and set Polly up gently and daintily on the horse's back, as if she were made of china, and she might break. There they are, Strawberry. Fledge, I should say. This is a rum go. Do not fly too high, said Aslan. Do not try to go over the tops of the great ice mountains. Look out for valleys and green places and fly through them. There will always be a way through. And now be gone with my blessing. Oh, Fledge, said Diggory to his, leaning forward to pat the horse's glossy neck. This is fun. Hold on to me tight, Polly. Next moment, the country dropped away from beneath them and whirled around as Fledge, like a huge pigeon, circled once or twice before setting off on the long westward flight. Looking down, Polly could hardly see the king and queen, and even Aslan himself was only a bright yellow spot on the green grass. Soon the wind was in their faces, and Fledge's wings settled down to a steady beat. At all Narnia, many colored with lawns and rocks and heather, different sorts of trees lay spread out before them. The river winding through it was like a ribbon of quicksilver. They could, by the way, quicksilver was really mercury. If you've ever seen mercury, we used to play with it as kids. And when you move it, it would ball up and you could roll it like a ball, but it was all liquid. And so they call it quicksilver because it would go from liquid to that kind of almost solid state and then back. But mercury, we found out, is also poison, so you don't touch it because it could be very dangerous to you. But if you ever get a chance to see it, it's also what's in some old thermometers. Because of that, they quit using it in thermometers. They could already see over the tops of the low hills which lay northward on their right. Beyond those hills, a great moorland sloped up gently up to the horizon. On their left, the mountains were much higher, but every now and then there was a gap you could see between the steep pine woods and the glimpse of the southern lands that lay beyond them, looking blue and far away. That that'll be where Archland is, said Polly. Yes, but look ahead, said Dickory, for now a great barrier of cliffs rose before them, and they were almost dazzled by the sunlight dancing on the great waterfall, which the river roars and sparkles down into the Narnia itself from the high western lands in which it rises. They were flying so high already that the thunder of those falls could only be heard just as a small, thin sound, but they were not yet high enough to fly over the top of the cliffs. We'll have to do a bit of zigzagging here, said Fledge. Hold on tight. He began flying to and fro, getting higher at each turn. The air grew colder, and they heard all the edges farple eagles. He began flying to and fro, getting higher at each turn. The air grew colder, and they heard the call of eagles far below them. I say, look back, look behind, said Polly. There they could see the whole valley of Narnia stretched out to where just before the eastern horizon there was a gleam of the sea. They were now so high they could see tiny-looking jagged mountains appearing beyond the northwest moors and plains of what looked like sand far to the south. I wish we had someone to tell us what all those places are, said Dickory. I don't suppose they're anywhere yet, said Polly. I mean, there's no one there and nothing happening. The world only began today. No, but people will get there, said Dickory. And then they'll have histories, you know. Well, it's a jolly good thing they haven't now, said Polly, because nobody can be made to learn it. Battles and dates and all that rot. Now, they were over the top of the cliffs, and in a few minutes the land of Narnia had sunk out of sight behind them. They were flying over a wild country of steep hills and dark forests, still following the course of the river. The really big mountains loomed ahead, but the sun was now in the travelers' eyes, and they couldn't see very clearly in that direction. For the sun sank lower and lower till the western sky was like one great furnace full of melted gold, and at last, behind a jagged peak, which stood up against the brightness as sharp and flat as if it were cut out of cardboard. It's none too warm up here, said Polly. And my wings are beginning to ache, said Fledge. There's no sign of the valley with the lake in it. Like what Aslan said, what about coming down and looking for a deep spot to spend the night? We shan't reach that place tonight. Yes, and surely it's about time for supper, said Dickory. So Fledge came lower and lower. As they came down nearer the earth and among the hills, the air grew warmer, and after traveling many hours with nothing to listen to but the beat of Fledge's wings, it was nice to hear homely, earthy noises again, the chatter of the river on its stony bed, the creaking of trees on the light wind. A warm, good smell of sun-baked earth and grass and flowers came up. At last, Fledge alighted. Dickory rolled off and helped Polly to dismount. Both were glad to stretch their stiff legs. The valley in which they had come down was in the heart of the mountain's snowy heights. One of them looked rosy red in the reflection of the sunset towered above them. I am hungry, said Dickory. Well, tuck in, said Fledge, taking a big mouthful of grass. Then he raised his head, still chewing, with bits of grass sticking out on each side of his mouth like whiskers. Come on, you two, don't be shy. There's plenty for all of us. But we can't eat grass, said Dickory. Said Fledge, speaking with his mouth full. Well, don't know quite what you'll do then. We're very good grass, too. Polly and Dickory stared at one another in dismay. Well, I do think someone might have arranged about our meals, said Dickory. I'm sure Aslan would have if you'd have asked him, said Fledge. Wouldn't he know without being asked, said Polly. I've no doubt he would, said the horse, still with a mouthful, but I've a sort of idea he likes to be asked. But what on earth are we to do? Asked Dickory. Now, do you think God likes to be asked even when he knows what we need? Sometimes I think we think God knows, so why should we talk to him? But Grandma likes it when you talk to her, even when she knows what you think. Sometimes because she doesn't. But God likes to hear from you every day, all the time. I'm sure I don't know, said Fledge, unless you try the grass. Might be better than you think. Oh, don't be silly, said Polly, stamping her feet. Of course humans can't eat grass any more than you could eat mutton chop. For good's sake, don't talk about chops and things, said Diggory. It only makes it worse. Diggory said that Polly had better take herself home by Ring and get something to eat there. He couldn't himself because he had promised to go straight to the straight on his message for Aslan, and if once he showed up again at home, anything might happen to prevent his getting back. But Polly said she wouldn't leave him, and Diggory said it was jolly decent of her. I say, said Polly, I've still got the remains of that bag of toffee in my jacket. It better be better than nothing. A lot better, said Diggory, but be careful to get your hand into your pocket without touching your ring. This was a difficult and delicate job, but they managed it in the end. The little paper bag was very squishy and sticky, and she finally got it out, so that it was more of a question of tearing the bag off the toffees than of getting the toffees out of the bag. Some grown-ups, you know how fussy they can be about that sort of thing, would have rather gone without supper altogether than eaten those toffees. There were 9 of them in all, I'm told, and it was Diggory who had the bright idea of eating 4 each and planning the 9th, for as he said, if the bar of a lamppost turned into a little light tree, then why shouldn't this turn into a toffee tree? So they dibbled a small hole in the turf and buried the piece of toffee and ate the other pieces, making them last as long as they could. It was a poor meal, even with all the paper they couldn't help eating as well. When Fledge had quite finished his own excellent supper, he lay down. The children came and sat one on each side of him, leaning against his warm body, and when he had spread his wing over each one, they were really quite snug. As the bright young stars of the new world came out, and they talked over everything, how Diggory hoped to get something for his mother, and how instead of that he had been sent on this message, they repeated to one another all of the signs by which they would know the places they were looking for. The blue lake, the hill, the garden on top of it. The talk was just beginning to slow down as they got sleepy, when suddenly Polly sat up wide awake and said, "Hush!" Everyone listened as hard as they could. Perhaps it was only the wind in the trees, Diggory said presently. I'm not so sure, said Fledge. Anyway, wait, there it goes again. By Aslan, it is something. The horse scrambled to his feet with a great noise and a great upheaval. The children were already on theirs. Fledge trotted to and fro, sniffing and whinnying. The children tiptoed this way and that, looking behind every bush and tree. They kept on thinking they saw things, and there was one time when Polly was perfectly certain she had seen a tall, dark figure gliding quickly in a westerly direction. But they caught nothing, and in the end, Fledge lay down again, and the children re-snuggled, if that is the right word, under his wings. They went to sleep at once. Fledge stayed awake much longer, moving his ears to and fro in the darkness, sometimes giving a little shiver with his skin as if a fly had lighted upon him. But in the end, he too slept.